Hi, everyone. You can hear me? Okay, I can hear the mic is on. I'm so thrilled to be here. Hopefully, we're going to have a really fun, loving conversation about the internet. And I'm going to start by introducing our panelists, and then I will jump into sort of a general question for everybody, and we'll go from there and see where it takes us. So at the very end here, we're honored to have Chica Andrade with us, who is a Brazilian travesti director, screenwriter, and consultant for audiovisual projects. She served on the board of the Trans Professionals Association in Audiovisual until 2023 and participated in the American Film Showcase at USC. Her career highlights include co-directing, and I'm sorry for my bad pronunciation here, Segura Esepose, I believe. Sorry. On Globoplay and directing Retrato Ichimo. She is the creator of the feature film House of Hilton, awarded by William Greaves and part of Firelight Media. Chica won the first Black Narratives Pitching Prize and the Reed Paradiso Prize at Diaspora Lab. She also attended Berlinale Talents and Filma Afro Lab in Colombia as a screenwriter. Welcome.
Thank you.
And next to Chica, we have Neema Githere Safone. Neema is a writer, artist, and guerrilla theorist whose work explores love and indigeneity in a time of algorithmic debris. Having dreamt themselves into the world via the internet from an early age, Safone's work prototypes relationality as art through experiments that span community, organizing, social design, travel, and image making. Safone's concept of Afropresentism, a term they coined in 2017 to explore diasporic embodiment in the age of big data, has influenced exhibitions, conferences, and cultural activations across 4 continents, from Bahia to Berlin. Safone is a 2023-2024 practitioner fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford University, where they are working on a project entitled Data Healing, A Call for Repair. Welcome, Neema. And last but very not least, of course, we have Jazmin Jones, who is a Brooklyn-based, Bay Area-raised visual storyteller, archivist, and organizer. And I know some folks just saw Jazmin's film Seeking Mavis Beacon a few minutes ago. Her aim is to create platforms for more vibrant and nuanced representations of the marginalized communities she's a part of. Working across visual mediums, her projects often echo personal experiences as a queer, non-binary Black femme waging intimacy in the post-internet era. In 2021, Filmmaker magazine listed Jazmin as one of the 25 new faces of independent film. She's been in fellowship with organizations like Sundance, The Flattery, and iBeam, and her work has been written about in publications like The New York Times, Freeze, Hyperallergenic, and Vice. In 2015, Jazmin co-founded BUFU, By Us, For Us, a project-based collective interested in solidarity among us, co-creating experimental models of organizing with you. In the span of 5 years, the collective has facilitated 400 plus free events centering queer and trans people of color, both in real life and online, and was named Best Art Collective Promoting People of Color Solidarity by The Village Voice. Fantastic. So let's jump in. Welcome, Jazmin. I also just want to acknowledge we have some translation help on stage, so if at any point I slow down, it's because I have been told that I am speaking too fast for the translation, so we're gonna try to stay on that. Okay. So I wanted to start with sort of a really big question for all of you. The internet is a paradox, right? On the one hand, it helps us organize, it helps us connect, create, allows us self-expression, right, and self-actualization. And on the other hand, it was designed as a military technology in the aid of Western imperialism. And those violences, in some ways, maybe live in its spirit, if we think that's a thing, right? It can be a place of harassment and hate, of distraction and disconnection. And so I'd love for you each to share your thoughts on this duality as both a part of your own creative practices and also your sort of personal experiences as just people who exist in this world.
Well, I'll start. And also, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here in dialogue with y'all. And I also must shout out my collaborator, Olivia Michaela Ross, who is in the audience. I think I'm always at odds and at war with like the idea of being perceived. If you've watched my Insta stories, it's like it goes between being like, look at me, I'm here, I exist, and then being like, how dare, like they're taking our data, like save yourself, get offline. And so I think personally, I'm like the internet, I think so, I oscillate between like paranoia and apathy. And like the paranoia being like they're taking everything from me, and the apathy being like they took it already. And I think that in terms of the film I just made, I was trying really hard not to let that like anxiety conspiracy theorists take over, and to also give weight and to encourage people like all of us to continue to engage with technology. And so to like circle that back to like Olivia, I think that actually like our dynamic in the film is like the balance I hope to embody internally. And so Olivia has a background in like coding and also has developed some really useful language around like what it means to be a Black person on the internet, concepts like cyber doulas, data trauma, work very much in conversation with data healing. And so for me, I think the distinction that I've realized is like because I was a user of the internet where I don't know how it works, but I participate, I'm often very fearful. Whereas with Olivia, because she has a deeper understanding of how the internet works, she also is a lot more empowered. And so that friendship has been helpful to me in terms of like not giving in to the like doom and gloom of it all. And yeah, if Olivia were up here, which, you know, she should be, then she would say like, you know, a computer is just rocks that we taught how to tell time or something like that. Like, I'm butchering it, but I think that's what I'm trying to embody. I'm trying to be like more in that space, but on a daily basis, I'm like, oh my God, I should have a piece of tape over my webcam.
I would agree with all of that, and I would add also a big shout out to Olivia, because there would not be data healing were I not introduced to the phrase data trauma in your class at Bufu in 2019, and I'm very grateful to you for all that you've birthed in your cyber doula work, for paving the way. And I mean, I think of the internet not just as a paradox, but also a contested territory. Like, we don't have actually a shared understanding or a shared definition of what the internet is. There's the internet, and then there's social media, which sometimes are synonymous and a lot of times are not. There's the internet, and then there's cyberspace, which sometimes are synonymous and a lot of times are not. And different things happen in each of those neighborhoods of what we use the internet to describe. And so for me, within my practice, a lot of my interrogation is like, what even is the internet? Like, when we're saying that, like, what does that mean? Because I know there's parts of the internet that make me feel sick and exposed and zapped in the brain. And I know that there's parts of the internet that have brought me closer in relationship with people who are foundational to my heart and my day-to-day life, and to just my desires to like live as a human being. And so I think those are distinctions that feel important to make and to have. And I also feel like the internet is like a big bully because of its lies. Like, there's, for being something that we engage with day to day, there's like such a lack of transparency as to how it functions and how exposed we truly are on it, and how reliant we're made to be. Like, there's very, very blurry ideas of consent online, and that I think is something that harms us offline, and those kinds of like offline, online, like breaking down those binaries and thinking about post-binary ways of engaging with the internet and defining the internet are what I feel are necessary in what I try and do. Yeah.
Well, BlackStar, audience, girls, Firelight, thanks to have me. I'm glad, very happy to be here. It's important for me. I will prefer to speak Portuguese because my English is not super good enough to have a deep conversations like this. Okay, I'm so sorry. I know it's not easy.
It's okay.
Use translator, but okay. Start português. Eu venho de um país onde há muitos anos se mantém como o país onde mais assassina pessoas trans em todo o mundo. O Brasil tem números de assassinatos de pessoas trans maior do que países onde ser LGBT é proibido, onde há leis que se proíbam ser LGBT. Time to translate.
I come from a country where for the longest time, Brazil has the largest number of murders of trans people. Number one in the world, with numbers that surpass even those countries where any LGBT identity is illegal.
E aqui eu estou falando sobre mortes extremamente violentas, né? Eu estou falando de situações gravíssimas, casos emblemáticos como de uma jovem de 20 anos que teve o coração arrancado e no lugar colocaram a imagem de uma santa. Esse é o nível de violência que nós vivemos no meu país.
And I'm talking to you about extremely graphic and extremely brutal cases as well. These are very violent scenarios, including that of a 20-year-old woman who had her heart ripped out, and in the place of her heart was left an image of a saint. So this is the level that we're talking about in Brazil.
Yeah. And another side, I'm sorry, em português. E do outro lado, ao mesmo tempo, nos últimos 10 anos, nós começamos a ocupar os espaços públicos, porque até o início dos anos 2000, nós não estávamos autorizadas a sair na luz do dia. Uma mulher como eu só tinha 2 opções, ou ser prostituta, eu não sei qual é a segunda opção, para uma geração anterior à minha.
But what we've seen in recent years is us taking more of the public space, is being out in public, right? Because I was someone, and my identity was one that was not authorized to be out in the light of day. So we had 2 options, is to be a prostitute, and the other option, I don't know what it was, actually. I don't know what that other generation before us had.
E foi com a internet que a gente conseguiu colocar a nossa voz para o mundo. Isso, claro, não aconteceu só no Brasil, mas no meu país tem uma especificidade, que se por um lado é o mais brutal com a minha comunidade, é também o país onde desponta com a maior participação política no Congresso, como artistas, de pessoas trans neste momento. E tudo isso se deu a partir de um movimento que surge na internet.
But we also see in Brazil, and also see in recent times, this coming together and coming out using the internet, right? Although Brazil has this leadership, so to speak, in violence against trans people, we also have leadership globally in representation and appreciation for. We see a lot of participation politically with elected officials. We see a lot of leadership with artists and other representation like that. And all of this was generated and became possible through the internet.
E para concluir minha introdução, eu quero que vocês saibam que é uma denúncia que eu faço em todos os países que eu vou falar sobre isso, mas ao mesmo tempo eu trago uma mensagem de esperança, porque as coisas estão mudando. Então, estar aqui e falar sobre o papel da internet nessa mudança, para mim, junto com vocês, é muito importante. Obrigado.
So to conclude my opening remarks here, in every space that I'm in, everywhere I go, I need to denounce this. I need to speak out on this. But I'm also bringing with myself a message of hope and of gratitude, and I'm very pleased to be participating in this conversation today about Black on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, this is an incredible place to start. I want to riff and sort of pull from some things that you all said and offer some individual questions. And I think I'd like to start with Neema, because you mentioned Afro-presentism in your opening remarks, and until I encountered your work, I had never heard the word Afro-presentism. And so I would love if you could sort of describe for us what that is and how it relates to the internet and the digital world, and also to the Black diaspora.
Yeah, so Afro-presentism is a term that has evolved a lot over the years. It first emerged out of a conversation that I had in 2017 in Accra, Ghana, with this curator, with the late curator, Nana Kwadwo. And we were there for this festival called Chalewote, which is a huge street art festival, the largest one in West Africa. And so many people were saying, you know, Africa's the future, Africa's the future. And Nana looked at me and was like, Africa's the present. Like, I don't know what they're saying. And I was like, oh my goodness, Afro-presentism. And at that time, I had heard a lot of people mobilizing Afro-futurism to refer to anything that related to Black people and the internet. And you know, I consider Afrofuturism and the work of Kojo Oshun and John Akomfra and Octavia Butler as a mothership genre, a mothership vision that makes so much of how we navigate and experience the internet as Black people possible today. And at the same time, Afro-presentism, I began theorizing and defining it out of a need to kind of shift the temporal locus, to not defer this kind of liberatory, you know, cybernetic rebellion into the future, and to look at how it was happening in the here and now, and how we're very much so inhabiting, thinking about the fact that Afrofuturism was being theorized around the turn of the millennium. We're now 20 years after that fact, and these digital tools, these, you know, memory devices, these recovery devices that they were speculating about are part of our day-to-day lives. And so the earliest definition of Afro-presentism was a genre fusing archival, documentary, and fine arts on and through new media in the expression of what is an Afrofuturist reality. Like, we are living in the future they talked about. But over the years, it's evolved into a more somatic genre. I think about it as being a collage of like invisible arts. So looking at sound and memory and the ways that they are being streamlined to us. We are taking in terabytes and terabytes worth of information, a lot of which has our own ancestry encoded within it on a day-to-day basis. And so I think of Afro-presentism as this kind of, a temporal rebellion and intervention, and also just a question of like, okay, how are we all navigating this age of total recall, which is a question that Kojo Oshun posed to us in 1996, and that kind of is the anchor of my speculation around Afro-presentism. Like, yeah, we're terabyte surfers, y'all. What does that mean? What have we inherited? And I also do want to touch on what Chica said, though, because I have Brazil to owe, actually, for a lot of Afro-presentism's development. Brazil is the first place that I was able to see so many other Black queer people expressing themselves in such limitless ways that I could not access on Google. I certainly was not seeing on television. And the way that like Black queer Brazilians were creating territories in cyberspace of liberation made me understand that, this kind of cybernetic terrain that we were creating as Black people, as queer people online, was a new territory that like needed to be defined and speculated around, and like one that whose citizen, like I was just curious about my own citizenship in that cybernetic territory. So thank you to your country.
That's actually a great bridge, because then that allows me to go back to Chica with the next question. So, I mean, you've talked about in your opening remarks and your work also shows the way that trans women in Brazil have used the internet really innovatively for advocacy, to not just create visibility, but also advocate for social change and policy. I wonder if you could talk about what you think the limitations of that visibility might be. Are there things about your experience with the internet that give you pause or make you feel less optimistic about using it as a tool in that regard?
I think I just forgot something very important. It's this violence against our community. Português. É muito mais agressivo contra as pessoas pretas. Claro.
I forgot something very important in my first remarks, which is that this violence is a lot more aggressive towards black people in Brazil.
Então, nesses dados, a gente está falando de a última estatística por um grupo bastante importante. Dado é que você tem 80% mais chance de ser violentada quando você é uma travesti, preta, marrom ou indígena. Mas se você for preta retinta, aí você está nesse quadro. 80% é mais de chance de ser violentada.
So the last statistic here to mention is super important, that you're 80% more likely to be violently attacked, violently assaulted as a transvestite woman if you are black, if you are brown, if you are indigenous. So if you identify with these racial identities, you belong in that 80%.
E essa intersecção de raça e gênero, ela tem sido levada para a participação política. Então, do que eu estou fazendo nesse momento, por exemplo, um documentário sobre Erika Hilton, uma travesti preta que se tornou a Congresswoman mais votada do ano de 2022, mulher mais votada no meu país, num país com esse paradoxo.
So there's also this political representation, like we're talking about. Okay, yeah. Like I'm working now on this project about Erika Hilton, the congresswoman, black travesti congresswoman that was elected, the woman who received the most votes in the whole country. So there's that paradox for you as well. Yeah.
And in the social medias, she has almost 5 million persons following her. Just in Instagram, it's about 3 million people. And of course, she got the youth. She can talk with these people. She's a kind of TikToker, but she's very socialist. I can say she has a spirit of a Michael X, but in a beautiful dress like this, you know. And then I think, I'm sorry, back to Portuguese. I'm sorry.
We love this. We love the code switch.
E eu acredito que, para ela, nesse momento, estar conseguindo ser chamada pela juventude como a nossa futura presidenta, eu estou filmando essa mulher há 2 anos. Então, para melhorar a tradução aqui, eu filmo essa mulher, essa travesti, há 2 anos. E há 2 anos eu vejo que, quando ela vai em lugares públicos, a juventude grita minha presidenta para ela. Isso é um ato histórico para a gente, né? E tudo isso aconteceu dentro da internet, com ela fazendo, por um lado, o jogo político, mas, por outro, não tendo medo de fazer o jogo das redes, que é algo que eu acredito que os movimentos radicais, por muito tempo, tiveram medo de se apropriar dessa linguagem, né? Movimentos radicais, à esquerda, revolucionários, nesse sentido, estou dizendo.
So for the last 2 years that I've been filming Erika Hilton in public spaces, seeing her move in public spaces, the youth has been so supportive, and people will shout, "That's my president, my president, my president," right? And there's been that change. And what is amazing to see is that Erika was able to use the internet for all of this, and this is in part thanks to the internet. On the one hand, doing the political work and doing the political messaging on the internet, and on the other hand, not being afraid to play the game of social media, not being afraid to play that internet game, which what we've seen for so much time is radical movements being afraid to play that game. Radical movements meaning socialism, meaning the left, meaning revolutionary movements.
Can I add something? It's interesting. So a lot of the digital diaspora research and Afro-presentism stuff happened in Brazil, and it is one of the places I've seen the least amount of critique of the internet's downside. And I've noticed it's because, that was the first place that I saw a state trooper car. A lot of my friends live in the favela. The state trooper car is driving, reverses, just puts his gun outside the window and just starts shooting, right? And it's levels of segregation and violence. So, not to speak on behalf, but it is something I've realized, the limitations pale in comparison to the way that we here in the States might be surveillance, algorithms, there literally have not been avenues for Black queer people, Black trans people to have any sort of protection, and so it's the limitations that we might see here pale in comparison, but you can say if that's wrong.
Nós temos uma expressão no Brasil que diz: Brasil não é para amadores. Can you translate this?
Yes. We have an expression in Brazil that says, Brazil is not for amateurs.
Yeah. You have to be able to be Brazilian,
Thank you. So, Jazmin, I want to bring it back to you and talk a bit about your film, which we just saw, which obviously would not have been possible without the internet. And in particular, you've talked about making the film during the pandemic. And so I wonder if you could talk a bit about what that process was like, and also, if anything, about how technology changed and the internet changed over the course of making the film, how that affected your creative process, how that affected your experience as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I think, this project straddled such an interesting time in terms of just the conversations we're having about the internet and AI and your personal data. And so I would say 6 years ago when I first started pitching this, it was people in collective spaces where we're having these dialogues, but I think maybe 3 years into the project, I saw the whole conversation around our autonomy go mainstream in a way that was also cool, we're onto something, and a little scary because it's taking us a while to finish this movie. I hope it's still relevant and the technology we're talking about is still applicable. And so, I talked about it really briefly in the Q&A, but initially we thought the concept of deep fakes and critically fabulating a more nuanced backstory for Mavis Beacon would be so cool. And then when we realized there's a real person attached to that reputation, and so whatever we project onto her, if it were up to me, I'm always Mavis Beacon would be a queer and all these things, and it's really not our place to project anything else onto this woman who's already encountered so many ideas and had to hold that. And then the literal technology has changed in terms of making this film easier too. And yeah, there's certain conversations that have come and gone in the course of the project. We were really interested in bridging out and looking into the different avatars, if you're familiar with FN Mecca or Lil Michaela, and in the course of trying to work on this project, you had this perpetual teenage girl, right? There's this company that makes avatars, and they have Lil Michaela for the woke young people. They have a blonde girl for the more conservative middle Americans. They have a light-skinned dude with face tattoos for other people, and they make these plots. And so I was watching them build up these characters and looking at who works at the companies. and like watching it unfold in terms of like a few years ago, Lil Miquela, during the whole Me Too everything, they thought it would be a good idea to have this avatar release a Me Too video, which the internet was like, why are you giving this like fictional character a story of sexual assault? This is weird. And so, yeah, but I saw the internet like do its thing too, where it's like that discourse was happening, and there are certain conversations around the internet we just weren't able to put into this film, partially because, you know, we only had an hour and a half, and partially because it was developing at such a rapid pace. But on a larger scale, I also think like there's something about this conversation around agency that's evergreen, right? Like we're talking about a Haitian woman being paid $500 to model for the cover of software, the first Black person ever to be on any software. That went on to be the most like popular software ever, right? So like before even people were like surfing the internet, you had Black bodies being used to sell things. And before that, you had Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben. And so like this is just an ongoing thing. And the idea of like how our bodies are commodified with technology is something I'm very interested in. And again, to quote the most brilliant person, my collaborator, Olivia Michaela Ross, she points out that like the way the internet works is like we have been taught to believe that it's forever, right? And so like your digital footprint's forever, but it's actually like, no, they're not storing your most personal memories forever. The parts of the internet that they're keeping is the data that they can profit off of. And so it's like your demographics, but like if you think that you're gonna be able to access your MySpace, it's a different thing. And like, so yeah, I think a lot, I oscillate between being incredibly comforted and terrified around the impermanence of the internet. And that's like the central conversation of the film.
I have a follow-up question for you, and I know you're going to say Olivia should be here to answer it, but you're here, so we're going to ask you to channel from the audience. You mentioned in your opening remarks the concept of a cyber doula, and how this concept has affected your thinking about the internet and also about sort of like creativity and identity. Can you say a little bit more about that concept?
I could. But Olivia, can I hand you the mic? I'm sorry, I've been defining Olivia's term. I'm like, she's smarter than me, you guys. Like, let's hear from the person themselves. Are you ready?
Why don't you come up?
Yeah, come, there's room.
Yeah, there's plenty of space.
Is this allowed?
Yes, it's allowed. No one's gonna stop us.
Welcome.
Olivia crashed the panel, as she should.
Hi, do you mind repeating your question?
Oh, repeating.
What is this, a cyber
Yeah,
doula?
tell us
Okay.
about what a cyber doula is. Tell us about the concept and how it's affected the concept and also how it's affected your creative work with Jazmin.
Yeah. I mean, the language of cyber doula came through the class that I taught on cyberfeminism at Bufu's like decentralized school with You4You, which is also how I met Neema, because the two classes that we both taught, cyberfeminism and on re-indigenizing, was it re-indigenizing technology?
It was Divest from
Divest from
Instagram.
Instagram were like the same week. It was an entire week that was kind of thinking about like community and diaspora and queerness and like how to kind of like be us online. That was the kind of central point of that week. And my family, our trade is birth work. My eldest sister runs a midwifery business in Florida, and for as long as I can remember, she's about twice my age. It's been the family business. Many of my family members are involved in it, and so midwifery and birth work and doula-ship has kind of always been a metaphor of care, and specifically a form of like renegade care that is like, as trends go, like sometimes it's sanctioned by the government and sometimes it's something that has to be done like clandestinely because, you know, people want to be able to control like who gets born and when and from which populations and like all of this kind of things. And information is also similar. People want to control, governments want to control who knows what and when and which populations. And the kind of role of doulas in terms of, safeguarding these kinds of protocols and technologies of knowing and connecting with each other online and like allowing people to have a relationship to a super pervasive system that is like free and loving and nonviolent. I think it's something that, yeah, Jazz and I, we wanted to extend to Renee if she wanted it, and also for her to have the freedom to say no if she wanted it, because oftentimes we are dominated by systems that don't want us to have the choice of saying yes or no at all. And that's kind of, yeah, where that feeling came from.
Thank you for that. Yeah. There's always room on the couch, like in theory. So I want to take that to something that the folks in this conversation, we had a pre-conversation, and there was something that came up that really intrigued me about the connection between the internet and ancestor work, the internet and magic. I think, Neema, you called it cyber mysticism. But like each of you in our pre-conversation mentioned things that sort of got these juices flowing for me, and I feel like these are ideas about technology that we don't often hear because we live in a world that sort of tells us that technology is over here and that these other things are over here. So I would love to hear any of you or each of you talk a little bit about how you understand the relationship between the internet and some of these more, maybe for lack of a better word, spiritual or magical kind of belief systems and ideas.
Muito bem. Eu vou começar por aqui. Eu usei um termo para falar da Erica Hilton e dos movimentos radicais, que foi socialismo. Mas que é muito importante deixar claro, eu não estou falando de Castro, eu não estou falando de Venezuela. Eu estou falando de algo que não tem nada a ver com esse sistema empoeirado que estamos cansadas de ver. Mas que há um movimento no Brasil que nega a lógica do capitalismo, nega, inclusive o próprio socialismo, nega tudo que foi visto e começa uma nova forma de pensar a sociedade que parte, né, dos movimentos queer, preto, e que a gente chama de aquilombamento.
Very well. Earlier, I made comments about Erica Hilton and socialism. And I just wanted to clarify that the socialism I'm thinking about is not the socialism of Castro or the socialism of Venezuela. It's a socialism that it has nothing to do with those dusty systems, but it's a system that rejects completely capitalism, that rejects completely even socialism as a party, right? And is based, it comes out of a queer politic, a black politic.
E aquilombamento, quilombo, você pode me ajudar a traduzir
eu vou
isso?
traduzir essa parte. So she's talking about this thing called aquilombamento. And quilombos in Brazil were free black communities, maroon communities, that were deeply rooted in spirituality and were fugitive of all of the existing systems because they created spaces that no system could imagine, systems outside of the white, oppressive, like slave-owning imagination. And so it's like this aquilombo, like that is the spirit of these queer movements, of like these trans communities, is that maroonage as it relates to class and as it relates to what you were about to say.
Yes, thank you so much. E eu vejo que na internet, no espaço da internet, essa discussão se amplificou e recebeu um nome. Aquilombamento, né? Criar novos quilombos, criar novos conceitos de sociedade, que está muito conectada com o ancestral, com tudo que temos de herança, mas que olha para um futuro onde isso é possível. Você vê uma juventude discutir isso e tem grupos que se chamam aquilombamento. aquilombamento, Chica Manicongo, que é uma travesti, por exemplo, que foi condenada pela Santa Inquisição brasileira. Existe o aquilombamento, Chica Manicongo, referência a todos os nossos ancestrais, em vários grupos que fazem esse debate. E eu digo isso... Alguém.
So yes, it was with the internet that these spaces of marinage, of aquilombamento, were created and spread. That this is where the term, was created, and these spaces were spread, with the idea being, let's form new quilombos, let's form new social relations using the internet, and this is something that is connected inherently to our ancestors, but also something that is talking about the future and looking at what is possible as a possible future. And there are groups that identify themselves with this name, that they take this name and how they refer to themselves, like Aquilombo, Aquilombamento, and Chica Manicomio, who was someone who was condemned. Pode explicar? Condenada, Chica?
Condenada pela Santa Inquisição brasileira.
Ah, okay. That's why I didn't understand. Was Chica Manicomi was someone who was condemned during the Inquisition, in like the Holy Catholic Inquisition in Brazil.
A
Black transgender woman. So these debates are alive and well and happening on the internet.
Então, só para fechar, e você tem diversos movimentos de aquilombamento acontecendo na vida real, onde as pessoas se ajudam e criam vínculos comunitários. E isso não está dentro da política, isso não está dentro de nenhum espaço convencional, mas que surge na internet e se torna físico, real, ponto de encontro. Acredito que há a conexão mais forte que temos entre o ancestral e a atualidade acontecendo no meu país.
So just to finish my point here, these are spaces and connections that are happening in real life as well as on the internet, with basically mutual aid style connections and sharing of resources in this way of aquilombamento or marinage. And this is something that is not happening inside politics, is not happening inside parties like that. But yeah, it was something that was birthed on the internet and brought to real life. No? And I want to say as well that this movement is the strongest connection that I feel and the strongest connection that I perceive to our ancestrality.
You have a great memory.
Valeu.
Can I add to that? We're always in conversation with the living, but we're also always in conversation with the dead. And that, like, when we're on our devices, it's no exception. And something I think about often is the coltan, the minerals, the things that are powering these devices are mined in places where our ancestors' bones are buried, right? And so over the span of time, thinking that like we quite literally share a lineage with the device, as spooky as that may seem, because of this relationship between our bones across millennia as African and African diasporic people and the sites of extraction that power these devices, be it in Congo or Mozambique or Brazil or wherever all of these things are torn away from Earth, similar to the ways we were torn away from Earth and continue to be, literally and like metaphorically. And so with that as one thread, I think about that, but I also think about the fact that the same way that ancestors might use birds or butterflies or water to speak to us, to reach us when they have a message, is the same way they're gonna see, oh, y'all got this fancy new thing put together, I'm gonna reach you through that too. Like, hello, it's me. This is a glitch, and it's not a glitch, it's me, are you listening? And the more attentive you are, you can feel crazy. If you clock it, you could be like, whoa, why does this always happen? Like, why is this light going off? And whoa, okay, quick detour, I'm gonna make it super quick. I love the whoa translated. I was told this story, I was recently in Melanesia, and I was told this story of the Tongan princess, she's still alive, Princess Angelica, who was appointed to be the High Commissioner in Australia. She was doing a tour of Australian museums. The tour went normally, whatever. A few weeks later, the person who gave her the tour reached out and was like, hey, you need to come back. My boss said the lights have been going on and off and weird things have been happening in the museum. So she asked me who I invited and I told her you, and when I told her the princess came, she said invite her back. So the princess comes back. Do these people not confess to her that they have the body of a young Tongan boy in storage in the basement? So yeah, everything was glitching when she came back. Story gets better. So my friend's telling me this story. She was sitting with the princess, right? And she has a lady in waiting. It's like the full princess situation. And she's telling this story to a group of students, and she has an empty seat next to her. And she gets to the end of the story, and she said, that's why I have this empty seat with me, so the boy can come with me everywhere, everywhere I go until we're able to take him home. Like that level of procedure to spirit, like devices, not just the phones, but the light fixtures, right? Even to someone who's uninitiated, you have to notice those connections. The mystic and the cyber, they're all tangled up, so yeah.
There's also, and Jazz, not to put you on the spot, but after I finish saying this, we have to tell the story about the camera and trying, when the footage.
In Haiti?
No, when we were in, sorry guys, when we were in the Bay and there was that camera. Yolanda remembers.
I remember, yeah.
Another person to bring to speak.
But before I pass the mic to Jazz, I feel like one of the things that has become quite special to me about the internet in recent years, thinking about it, particularly thinking about just like diasporic connections of like all colonized people. You've heard in the beginning we kind of talked about the internet as like this military technology, and in many ways that is very, very true. Like particularly in the United States, ARPANET, like there is a militaristic urge behind the creation of this infrastructure, but that militaristic urge, the background of that even desire to conquer is the desire to pillage and to take. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me and to many folks who kind of think about internet and coloniality and what it means to like be of color and queer in this space is, factually the transatlantic slave routes and the ways that the internet is built, like undersea cables, they're across the same trade routes. And the reason for that, it hit me like, oh, duh, idiot, is because those routes are trade routes. It is the fastest way to connect the colonized world. And pre the internet, traversing that route on a bus, it was slow enough, right, that you could pick someone up and put them somewhere else, and there was no way of returning. But because you've now built this, super highway, it's like the worst thing Europe has now ever done, because for the first time in human history, all of your ops are now able to talk to each other. And there's a sense of like, yeah, these places which were targeted as places of extraction, and that is the reason, it's now like knowledge extraction or like, brain space extraction, and that was the reason for their presence, or like to be able to speak militarily to like this base here and that base there. Like now the people are able to hijack, now Spirit is able to hijack that infrastructure because it is still a pointed connection. And I think it's really from like Brazil, which has like the largest African diaspora outside the continent, to here, to everywhere. It's like, yeah, now we're kind of in this new turning point in history where connection is possible to hijack and to deturn in a way that like is previously not quite so imaginable.
Yes. Wow. I mean, like, wow, everybody. And I really love any time the conversation around technology can come back to like ancestor and indigeneity, and that's why I feel really excited to be on this stage. And for me, honestly, I have a very similar relationship, and Olivia's heard me talk about this a lot, to both my relationship to spirituality and technology, which is like with both things, it's like, ooh, am I doing this right? And it's like, okay, I don't know. And so this film has like forced me to lean into two areas of interest that I'm also like, I'm not a specialist. And on an intuitive level, right, like when I hear about like, I don't know, folks and tribes who are like, we are not going to let you take our picture because you're literally taking our soul. I'm like, true. And then it makes me really scared to be online. But also, like, and Neema, I like being next to my sources of inspiration because I can get my quotes right. But like, Neema posted something on Instagram recently, and I was talking about this with Yelen last night because it's like, I'm having a lot of fun being online these days. And you were talking about like, you posed some question of like, what digital footprint or what social media would you want your great-great-great-grandchildren to find?
If your great-great-grandmother had an Instagram, what would you want to learn about her through it? Or what would you...
I feel
I
like,
like that remix, though.
yes, you know, I'm the
I want her
grandmother.
TikTok. Forget the Instagram.
You know, to me, I feel like so often we talk about like, oh my God, I'm being perceived. Mark Zuckerberg is taking my person and then making money and like suppressing me. And I think that framing of like, yeah, okay, outside of whatever is happening in a capitalistic framework and like, who knows if the social media will be there for future generations to find, but that framework of being like, I am actively archiving my experience in like real time, and like, I found that to be the most like liberating notion in terms of like, oh, like I'm not using social media because I'm a careerist or I'm being self-promotional. I'm using it because like this is a platform that I have control over in terms of like shaping out the person that I am in this world. And then, yeah, like spiritually, this film also has a life of its own. Olivia was talking about like, we had a shoot, if you saw the movie, there's a very important scene where we get our first lead into where our subject of interest might be. And, you know, we are all first-time filmmakers, and we got back to the house, and it was a long day, and Yelen realized that some of the footage was potentially missing. And they said a little prayer to, you know, their entities that they're in touch with in their spirituality, and the footage came back. And also, like, we've been on shoots in Haiti with some folks that it's like, I don't know if we should be shooting this with y'all right now, and I'm not comfortable, and then the footage disappears, you know? So it's like, I do think like this idea of like, all of these things are like tools just to channel the entities. And so like, whether it's a light fixture, a laptop, your digital footprint, like it's all in conversation. I find that to be really comforting and makes me want to engage with it more.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sure we have questions. I've been given the signal that it is time for us to open it up. So for folks in the audience, anyone interested in asking these folks about their work, about the internet, about being Black on it?
Get Black on
It's a theme. Yeah, being Black off it, if that's what...
Now all y'all know I have a loud mouth. I asked a question during the film, but thank you so much for continuing to open yourselves and give us so much to think about and sit with. And these are conversations where I feel like a lot of people are afraid to have. So I also feel like there's some bravery in the room with this.
Note, sorry to interrupt you. Just go slow enough so we can translate.
Oh, period. Yes. I have a question about the distinction was made between online and offline, kind of in one of your introductions. I'm forgetting who. But I'm curious about like what that relationship, how you all view the relationship of like melding online and offline realities. And I think a lot about like like what is the role of interpersonal relation online? And I'm thinking about like cancel culture and et cetera, but I'm also thinking about like, yeah, the way that the line is so blurred between our embodied lives and our online lives, and what, I don't know, obviously it's not like, and what are the solutions to that very complicated problem, but like, what do you all think, like how can we be even more in our bodies through the internet almost, in conflict or in community specifically?
Yeah, no, I love anytime we acknowledge that like both things coexist and are wrapped up in each other. And for that reason, I shouted out another theory Olivia had term Olivia had created that I was like, oh my God, I needed that, and I'll let her define it. But yeah, the concept of data trauma, if you want to.
Yeah, data trauma was another term that came up in that class, and it was kind of a way of talking about specifically the trauma of like like being like your things about you being like operationalized as data, like being counted, being not counted, and kind of what that like tabularization like does to the way you think about yourself and the way you think about other people and the world around you and concepts, things, stuff you like, stuff you don't like. We're kind of conditioned to think about them like almost in lists, in a way that some of it is like not entirely because of the internet. So, like we've had books, we've had other forms of media where like things are organized quite linearly. But there's a certain point to which it kind of contributes to a fragmenting of identity, which sometimes is quite helpful in the sense of like often folks who are at the farthest ends of the spectrum in terms of the ways they experience data trauma, they're also like the freest in terms of like their ability to kind of live fugitively, and to kind of skirt around these systems. They are more suspicious. There's a level of wisdom, and also precarity.
So I'm like, to make sure I'm also understanding, because I'm like, yeah, data trauma. So like, are you talking about like I don't know, the double-edged sword of like the type of people who get shadow banned are the ones who also
You know, it's like being shadow banned like is like horrifying. But like me and Neema were talking over breakfast the other day. It's like on one hand, it's like being shadow banned can like make it difficult to reach the outside world, but then it also protects you. Like there's a level of like being perceived less, that also like imagine if every single post you ever made blew up. You know what I mean? Like, and there's this like it would make it so like just because you have like a really large amounts of followers, like suddenly you're unable to kind of access any smaller group of people. Not that shadow banning is not net difficult, like it's a really annoying phenomenon. And I think Neema, actually, you've been collecting some really interesting data about that I want to speak on.
I know Chica has stuff to say. We've been talking about, I remember in our pre-talk we talked about Erica Hilton and the forms of violence that she experiences online because of the visibility, having millions of followers, and the data trauma of you said how many death threats she receives on a daily life. And I think to me when you were sharing about that, and you can add on it, but it's like online and offline is actually not a binary in the way that nothing is ever really a binary. They're very porous and they spill into each other. And yeah, I mean, you can add to that. I guess the last thing I'll say, the most online I ever felt was when I microdosed mycelial therapy for 2 weeks. I was so logged on, tapped into the real world, connected to all beautiful things underground. So that's the non-binary to me.
Well, I think every one of us, Black, trans, LGBTQ people in internet that have export, threat of death, it's common, yes, because I think it's a kind of tool they have, no, to put a threat in us. Oh, I'm speaking English. Well, and then, but I think there is another paradox. I'm not sure if it is in around the world, but in my country is in the beginning of the boom of internet, using the internet to our struggles. A lot of youth emerging, talking about seriously about our problems, denouncing a lot of problems, and then the brands change everything. Because if you are a little bit radical, it's not interesting for the brands, and then everything becomes superficial. And then it's super serious because we lose a lot of people in this game. And I think this is a big paradox between virtual and the real world, because internet became a kind of very soft place to talk about racism, but in a very softly way. Yes.
Other questions?
We have time for one more.
Thank you. So my question is maybe a little bit of a prompt. If you have a dream for the future of the internet, you could share, or maybe a hope. Because I think we've created, as like Black and queer folks, we've created so much about what makes the internet great. So if we were to shape it further in our image, what would that look like for you?
Fantastic question. Especially to end
I'm
on.
like, not to contradict Afro-presentism, because what a term. Like, we needed that. I'm almost like, the future, my ideal future of the internet looks like the past of the internet. You surf the web. No social media. Maybe you're on a message board. It's not that fast. It can't collect that much about you. AI doesn't exist. There's this website, and I miss it so much. If you're like my particular type of millennial, maybe you remember, it was called Stumble Upon. And after school, you literally press a button and it just shows you a cool new website. Every time you press a button, it's a cool website, games, whatever. And none of them were sponsored. None of them were selling you anything. And you could endlessly be shown different corners of the internet. And as I get older, I'm like, the internet is not this massive thing. It is Instagram, and it is TikTok for me. And if I'm not on those, then maybe I'll check my email. But I'm actually I don't know where to go in a way that also doesn't encourage capitalism. I'm like, oh, Pinterest is a cool place to discover things, but now it's selling me everything and reinforcing all of these weird aesthetic things in my mind. And every platform I'm on has an agenda. And so to me, and Olivia talks about this too in terms of the different internets we were raised on, right? I'm on Zanga, I'm learning to code on MySpace so I can get my top 8 looking cute. Whereas I don't know, what's the internet? And what's your future internet, but also where is the internet you're coming from?
Yeah, I feel like I was born in 2001, so there was I got a really early Instagram account behind my mom's back, but I was 11, so it was kind of I remember very clearly there was a moment where I turned 13 and I was really excited to be able to stop lying to all of the sites that say oh, you have to be over 13 to give us any data. But I feel like there's it was Tumblr before Tumblr got weird. There was a sense of there was there was still games. There was Papa's Freezeria. There was Roblox. Not Roblox. There was this cool girls go games or dress up games. There was definitely still a sense of play and exploration, but it was. And there was a reason to press do you remember the I'm feeling lucky? When you did the search in Google or something? So I think it was kind of this in-between time where things were still personal, but I very much quickly was witnessing commercialization as I was going through puberty. I feel like my future is a bit similar to yours, but more so in the sense of social. I would like society or communities to get to a place where we will be okay if social media collapses, and a more cooperatively owned social kind of area on more of a message board, more of places, more of places to gather that we choose the terms of them, and places to gather that don't feel like they're subject to random censorship and that kind of thing. Because I do think having a social platform revolutionized a lot of things and brought people together who didn't know how to find each other. But once we figure out how to find each other, we should go together someplace else. Plus, Facebook's laying everybody off.
My future of internet is just without Elon Musk.
Yes.
Same.
truly.
My future of the internet is a place, one, it's hard to envision, like I want to take for granted that it's a place that we're safe, that we're not extracted from or put in harm's way. And with that being taken for granted, which is rarely something that we get to do, it's a place that helps us regulate. It's a place that helps us be more honest with our desires, for connection with one another, free of behavioral modification. It's a place where we can listen to ourselves and have our curiosity as a compass guide us towards the parts of the world that we ourselves from here and from everything that came before us are curious about and long for. It's a place of discovery, yes, but in a way that that honors the connections that we choose, not the trances imposed on us. And it's not one big stage unless you want it to be. Then make it a stage, shake some ass, do whatever, but only if that's like where you're genuinely led to. Yeah.
Awesome. That's a beautiful, beautiful vision.
And I want an internet that shows me a freebie sun.
Yeah, true.
Like tomorrow, ideally.
I think we're out of time. I'm looking around for my time cues, but I think that was the last question, so I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. Can we give these folks a round of applause for all the insight and wisdom and also making me feel very old? I always appreciate that because my version of the early internet is very different than that version. Thank you again, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.